This is iCastNews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City, and this is the Russia folder. Joining me, as he frequently does, is Dr. Thomas Graham. Tom, welcome.
Good to be here.
Tom is one of the experts, the wise men on Russia, things Eastern European and world politics, diplomat, counselor to the President of the United States, former man in charge of the National Security Committee's position on Russia, now with Kissinger Associates, teaching at Yale. Weather's a strange thing. I think we just felt the last breeze of the Cold War come wafting by. According to what I've just heard, Washington, House of Representatives, 365 to 43, the 1974 Jackson-Vanik Amendment limiting trade with then the Soviet Union, now Russia, has been voted out of order, sent into the dustbin of history.
As soon as it gets past the Senate and the President signs it, but it looks like it's going to happen finally. Probably a decade or more too late, but nevertheless, something that should have been done and needs to be done right now. I think the unfortunate aspect of it is the way they've done this is linked it to the Magnitsky Bill. Now, we can talk about the Magnitsky Bill and what the implications of that are, but it certainly will send a mixed message to the Russians as to what the intent really was behind the decision to lift the Jackson-Vanik Amendment.
They're giving with one hand and giving a baby slap on the other hand, and the Russians are so sensitive to their positions in the world that I think the reaction's going to be as if they got punched in the nose instead of had a helping hand extended and got a baby slap.
No, that's right. And the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs within the past few days has said what they've said repeatedly over the past several months is that they've prepared a set of reactions to this, counter arguments, things that they will do in order to underscore the displeasure with the Magnitsky Act. What those might be, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, maybe they'll turn away some American human rights violators. Who knows? I happened to once have dinner with Mr. Magnitsky. I thought he was a decent and very quiet man, so I feel badly for everything that happened to him, but I'm not sure that this is what we need to repeat to get our relations on a better footing.
Well, I don't think the intention is to get the relationship on a better footing, obviously. This is, I think, a number of members of Congress and senators who want to send a message to their own constituents, I think, more than to the Russians, that they stand up for something in world affairs, human rights, and so forth. And the big question here is what are the consequences, the practical consequences of a bill like this? Does it really help promote the goal that the Congress says it's trying to promote? That is the respect for the rule of law, the development of a genuinely democratic political system in Russia or not. I have my own doubts about this, serious doubts, in seeing the way this interaction has played itself out over the past 2 to 3 decades. The Kremlin will react. The way it reacts will almost certainly be negative from the standpoint.
Oh, it has to be.
And it's a reaction that people in Congress ought to understand and know that that's what they're doing. Second, if our concern really is keeping corrupt officials out of the United States, we have plenty of ways of doing that. I think you can make a convincing argument that we would have more leverage if the Russians knew we were going to do that on a regular basis and the lists weren't public. So every official, before he applied for that visa, had to ask himself the question, what is the risk that I'm going to be humiliated by a visa denial as opposed to his knowing already whether he's on the list or not. In a sense, what the Congress will now do is set up a list of people who are denied visa, but there'll be a parallel list of people who can now apply and get into the United States.
Who may themselves be very corrupt and have done something to rip off another company or denied human rights somewhere else. We've got to another point, another milestone, we've had at least 3 executive selection processes going on. We've had new leadership selected in the People's Republic of China. In the non-People's Republic of Russia, the Russian Federation, we've got Mr. Putin back as president. And in one case, in the United States, we've had a democratic election, and the executive has in fact been selected by the people. That's in our rearview mirror. Does this clear the way for some of those big issues that have been stalled for a while? I'm thinking of arms control. I'm thinking of the issues, particularly today, when the Israelis have shown their new technology with Iron Drone that they can shoot down missiles. The whole controversy over placing equipment that would track missiles presumably coming out of Iran too close to Russia. Are we going to begin to have some negotiation momentum going forward on these issues?
I'm not sure if momentum's the right word. With the elections or the leadership issues decided,
They are leadership, because I mean we can't really say Mr. Putin was elected. I mean,
well, but you mentioned the Chinese as well.
Yes, they're even worse.
Mr. Xi became the preeminent leader is a mystery to almost anyone who looks at this from the outside.
What would Churchill say it was? A mystery wrapped in enigma, wrapped in a Chinese fortune cookie.
No, exactly. But he said, but the key is perhaps national interest.
Yeah.
What we can do now with the leadership set in both the United States and Russia is to sit down and begin to talk about these issues again. Everything has been put on hold for the past year, perhaps a little bit more than that, why these issues were decided, why they played themselves out. Whether we're going to be able to make progress on these issues is quite another matter. Arms control is a good place to start. Clearly the president in a second term would like to reduce further nuclear weapons, nuclear delivery vehicles. And he will have some conversations with the Russians about that. But I think there's serious questions about how far you can go down before one of two things happens. One, you reach the threshold where whatever the United States is considering in missile defense actually does begin to pose a threat to the Russian strategic arsenal. And two, you reach a level, and the Russians are talking about this already, where the Chinese are a factor. And so we have gotten accustomed to a situation of bilateral arms agreements between Russia and the United States over the past 30, 40, 50 years. We are approaching an era when they have to be multilateral. And I don't think anybody in Washington or Moscow has begun the serious work of thinking through what strategic stability looks like in a multipolar strategic environment.
Well, and the multipolar part is pretty evident this week. We've had the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Mr. Rybakov, going to Tehran and talking about how he does not believe that the sanctions putting the squeeze on the people of Tehran should be done the way they are being done, because everything must go through the Security Council. We're waiting to see what the Russian position is now on the conflict with the Israelis and the Palestinians and in Gaza, because the Russians' position has shifted enormously. The Russians, as you well know, Mr. Putin is rather philo-Semite. The Russian public sees a lot about their countrymen in Israel every day. So the automatic backing that used to come for the Egyptians or even the Palestinians isn't there. And in fact, because they have that long track record, the Russians could be very good officers in trying to broach some kind of at least dialogue if they wanted to.
We'll have to see how that plays itself out. I agree with you. It's a very complicated situation. The Russians need to think through what their strategic interests are. They are changed because the demography of the region has changed in a way that does give Russia a greater interest in protecting Israel.
A million of, I mean, they talk about hours in Israel.
Yes,
I mean, that's remarkable. I mean, the same day that you and I are talking about repealing Jackson Vanik, and they talk about hours, and there's something poignant about that.
No, that it took the United States probably 10 to 15 years too long to do this. ethnic Russians were becoming an increasingly larger share of the Israeli population.
Yeah, what's this Jewish thing that I get my visa for?
You've got a foreign minister, Lieberman, who comes from the Soviet Union.
He could have been a great Olympic wrestler for them.
He could have been the Russian foreign minister at some point.
Oh, no. Lavrov is much too moderate compared to Lieberman.
Right, absolutely. But in any event, those things have changed. I think the issue here is what levers Russia really has to pull in the Middle East at this point. It's clear that they've got a different set of networks and they've developed over time. But I think the question that everyone will be asking, including in Washington and European capitals, is what can Russia do in a constructive way on the ground that will help resolve these issues. I think that's something of a mystery. The Russians haven't made this clear. What they have done over the past several years is simply say, no movement forward. You've got to take this through the UN Security Council. But they haven't been very good at offering what possible resolutions there might be to some of these crises in the Middle East.
Well, what they are offering, of course, in a very backhanded way, is their brains through the brain drain. So many of the people who are working on those Israeli, the Sling of David, the Iron Drone, are people who are trained in the good schools in Russia and the Soviet Union, who've lent themselves to the Israeli defense establishment. The question also is, can the Russians now begin to think about maybe buying some of this equipment? This is an incredible technical display we're seeing this week on the Russians. There are Russian-made rockets being shot down, but Russian brain power.
The Russians are on both sides.
They're everywhere there. Sure.
The weapons and creating the weapons to counter the weapons.
Well, the Quasam missiles may be homemade, but they're using Grad launchers to get them off the ground.
I think we're still some time away from when the Russians will feel comfortable buying their military equipment from the Israelis, if that's what you're asking. You see the problems they have with trying to buy the Mistral from the French, for example. But there is a real question about Russia's ability to rebuild its defense industrial sector to begin to produce the type of military equipment that will be competitive in the 21st century. There's a lot of real work to do there. And of course, as we all know, corruption is a big part of the issue. Whether they can get their hands around that and drive forward some concerted policies is one of the big question marks.
I've got two final things. You talked about corruption. I can't help but thinking that this week, when you've had the backwash of the drive against corruption in the Russian Defense Department, that the Kremlin targeted Mr. Navalny so much, but yet they're using some of his techniques to at least make public the corruption that's endemic there. This is like taking from the Gulag guys ideas about how to build missiles.
Absolutely. How this is going to play itself out, we don't know at this point. Obviously, what you've seen happen in Russia over the past couple of weeks can be interpreted in a number of different ways. It could be the beginning of a serious campaign to deal with corruption, but it's indeed that it has to go beyond the Minister of Defense. There's some people who are even closer to the center of power. It could be simply an effort to sort out the factional struggle inside the Kremlin, with people realizing that corruption is one of the ways of bringing down your opponents in that struggle at this point. So what we have to determine, and we'll only see this over time, whether this is something that's going after corruption or whether corruption and anti-corruption is being used as a tool to advance the interests of certain factions inside the Kremlin.
A flag. We started by talking about rule of law and changing the rules of law. Domestically, Russia has just upped the ante on their treason laws. Is this something that looks like more oppression being prepared? Is it simply emotional reaction to all the demonstrations that went on, essentially in big cities, but not across the countryside? Or is this the Kremlin kind of fanning the fires of emotional nationalism and stop all that corruption with foreigners and stop selling secrets. I mean, it could be that my ticket to the Kremlin to get in would be considered a state secret these days.
Right. I mean, you're creating a situation where Russians can't talk to anybody who doesn't carry a Russian passport without running the risk of being accused of treason. As everything else, you have to see how this is implemented in practice. And I would be surprised if there would be a rapid move to go after people using this new law on charges of treason. I think the disturbing thing from our standpoint is over the past several months, they've laid the groundwork for a much more repressive policy, if that's the direction in which they go. And I think that's probably what is motivating at this point. Prepare. We don't need to launch at this point. We'll see how things develop. People may get the right message from what they see being put in place. And the best thing to do would not be to have to use these weapons. But if the situation develops in a way that is seen as threatening on the part of Putin or the people around him, then they already have the legal basis to go after people. So this is something that's going to unfold over the next
Walk Putin-y and carry a big stick.
Something along those lines, but again, you don't want to have to use that big stick.
Yeah.
Unless circumstances allow you no other alternative.
Well, Tom, I think you're right that it is too late, 15, maybe even 20 years too late, but I'm glad I'm sitting with you on a day that we moved closer towards getting rid of Jackson Vanik. Myself, I remember when it happened, and back in 1974, I thought it was a dumb thing. I changed my mind for a while, but in retrospect, I think it was a dumb thing.
Well, that probably is consensus, at least in this room.
Well, for the Russia Folder and iCastNews.com, Dr. Thomas Graham, I'm Jonathan Sanders.